true.
Yeah.
You're like that cool history teacher in high school that teaches all the kids to hate America.
Hello and welcome back to the Plugged In Podcast, a weekly news show all about the future of transportation. I'm Patrick George, editor-in-chief of InsideEVs.
And I'm Tim Levin, senior editor at InsideEVs. On this week's show, the EV tax credits may be dead, but EV deals are here to stay, at least for now. Porsche's new Cayenne Electric gets a battery glow-up, and then later in the episode, we interview Elaine Buckberg, a climate and sustainability expert at Harvard. And we ask what's next for America now that the EV tax credits are gone. She was also the chief economist at GM for a number of years, so she was kind of the perfect guest to talk to about this current moment and what's next for EVs in the U.S.
Yeah, and she worked at the U.S. Treasury Department, too, at one point. We had a really fascinating chat with Elaine Buckberg, and she's one of those people who, when you look at her resume, you realize that you haven't done anything with your life. So, yeah, she's really, really awesome, fascinating person, and excited to chat with her. Before we get into this week's news, I wanted to remind our listeners to keep out for our upcoming 3 podcast episodes where we interview BMW executives at Climate Week NYC, and had some great discussions there, too. Those will drop weekly starting this Wednesday, and the first one's all about BMW's hydrogen vehicle efforts and how it might have made a hydrogen car you might actually want if you're into that sort of thing.
Just maybe.
Maybe, just maybe. All right, let's dig into the news, Tim. No time to waste today. I don't care how you're doing. You don't care how I'm doing. We never really have. So we'll just take the mask off and
how dare
get into
you?
it. Well, it's true, and you know you feel the same way. It's fine. Our first story this week. They're gone, Tim. The electric vehicle tax credits, the discount of up to $7,500 to finance or lease a qualifying new electric vehicle, has been yeeted into the sun as of midnight Wednesday. I'm not sure if you heard about that or not. Did you, Tim? You aware?
Oh my God, dude. I was just about to buy a Hyundai Ioniq 5 today.
Yeah.
Actually, we'll get into it later. That one actually might be okay.
Like I said, I would love to meet the person that did not know about this at all and just I was going to go Ioniq 5 shopping this weekend. You should have done that exactly one week before this, always.
Honestly, even though I want to see this industry grow as much as the next guy, I think the tax credits were a good thing. I'm pretty excited to not have to write about it anymore. I feel like it's been the entire last 6 months or whatever has just been what's going to happen after the tax credit? When will it go away? Whatever. And I'm kind of ready for that part of my life to be behind me, to be honest.
Yeah, whenever this current moment in American history is over, if anyone ever says the word tariff to me ever again, they're getting punched in the mouth. just I'm warning anyone out there that's happening. What we do know is that the end of the tax credits led to a pretty huge surge in EV sales in America in the third quarter of this year. That's July, August, September, and pretty much every automaker that sells EVs had a pretty good time.
Yeah, Ford said that its EV sales grew by 30% in the third quarter, and it sold a record over 30,000 EVs just in September alone. GM sells a bunch more models than Ford, so kind of stands to reason that it did even better. It delivered 66,500 EVs in Q3.
Wow.
And in the first 9 months of this year, it's already surpassed its entire EV sales total from last year. So GM has already sold well over 140,000 EVs in the first 3 quarters of 2025.
It's super impressive, and we're getting more and more results but as we record this, the best-selling Audi in Q3 was the Q6 e-tron, their new electric SUV on the brand new EV platform. And not just its best-selling electric model or SUV or whatever, no qualifier. Its best-selling car was the Q6 e-tron, and that's great to see. I really like that thing a lot.
Yeah, no, they sold, I think it was over 10,000 Q6 e-trons in the last quarter, which pretty good for them.
Yeah, you got to get up pretty early in the morning to take down the Audi Q5. So good for Audi there. So now the question is, what the hell happens next? With all the tax credits gone, EV sales are expected to decline in the coming months in America. for a lot of reasons that we've talked about on this show and we'll continue to talk about today. Like, this is hardly the end of things, and all these automakers are, marching towards zero emissions and electrified engines over time. But for now, we are expecting a dip. And even Jim Farley, CEO of Ford, he told Fortune he wouldn't be surprised if the EV sales in the U.S. went down to about 5%. And they kind of closed almost 10% last year. So he's expecting maybe half of what they once expected.
Yeah, 10%. We just hit 10% in the U.S. this past quarter
with the surge. Yeah,
new record. So yeah, it's depressing. I always wonder when you see somebody like Jim Farley say that. Like, I think as far as auto CEOs go, he's like pretty straightforward. I think he says what he thinks. I think it's also a little bit of cloud cover for them to say, like, EV sales ultimately depend on, the demand, consumer demand, but also it depends on like how many they're willing to make and sell at a loss. And so I think some of these executives coming out like Farley and saying demand is going to drop, I think is a little bit of cloud cover for them to just sell fewer of them over the time. They're saying, oh, it's not us, it's consumer demand falling because of the tax credit.
Yeah, the subtext is like, it's not the worst thing in the world that we are literally lighting piles of money on fire with every F-150 Lightning because we can't make it profitably. And more on that in a bit. But like, luckily for us, Tim, America's automakers are the real heroes because they're here for us. Not even 24 hours into the death of the EV tax credit, they're offering big discounts and price cuts and even aggressive lease deals to offset the increase in prices for the tax credit going away. Such is their bold commitment to an environmentally friendly future and the belief that they have in electric mobility.
Yeah, and they don't want these things to just sit on the lot. I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah, it's mostly that. It's they don't want to. They just don't want to pile it up. So let's dive into some deal news. Reuters reported this week that GM and Ford have concocted an elaborate scheme to get you $7,500 off the lease price of the EV of your choice from those automakers. And this is really clever. Like, each of their financing arms has basically purchased a ton of EVs already in dealer inventory and made the initial down payments on them, which allows them to qualify for the tax credit. They kind of like locked it in by buying their own vehicles, sort of, and factoring in that $7,500 subsidy into the lease rate that you, the customer, gets.
Yeah, so this is kind of like, this is how it has worked for the last couple of years. This is why leased EVs, all of them get the tax credit, is because the leasing arm buys these EVs, they get this commercial tax credit of $7,500, and then they can pass it on to the person who leases the car. And it seems like now, as far as I understand it, GM and Ford are just buying these things. They just decided to buy them in bulk, basically. Before the tax credit ended September 30th, they were like, we're going to buy a whole bunch of these things, get the tax credit so that we can keep offering cheap leases over time.
Passing the savings on to you, Tim. A Ford spokesperson confirmed to us that the lease deals will exist until December 31st, and that in order to secure those discounted prices, you have to use Ford credit when you go that leasing route. And a GM spokesperson did not put a timeline on it, but they just said that these deals will exist at participating dealers while supplies last.
Yeah, and that's not the only deals we've got in the EV market in October, right?
As we record this today, we learned that Hyundai has responded by slashing prices on the Ioniq 5 up to $9,800 for its 2026 models, almost 10 grand. Why it's $9,800 and not like just an even 10K, I don't know, but it's some magical Hyundai math that makes sense to them on a balance sheet. But with that price cut, this puts the Ioniq 5's entry level trim maybe into the mid $30,000 range. Which is really impressive. Like, that's like for the sort of standard 2-wheel drive model that doesn't have a ton of electric range, but like it's still an Ioniq 5 for mid 30K maybe. So keep an eye on that deal. And in addition to these price cuts for the 26 Ioniq 5s, the current 2025 model year vehicles will benefit from getting a $7,500 cash incentive in October. So basically, they're going to kick in $7,500 on those models in this month. So super cool. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I've been talking to a bunch of experts about like what's going to happen after the EV tax credit goes away. And one guy I talked to from JD Power, he was basically like, look, the EV prices are not going to just jump up immediately in October because they still have a ton of these things to sell. Like they have hundreds of thousands of them that they don't want just like sitting on lots. And so he was like, I expect to see incentives, and boom, there you go. Like the day after it ends, you got Hyundai dropping prices by 10 grand. I was looking at this and I was like, does this mean that the 2026 Ioniq 5 is like the best EV deal in America? I mean, we've got to take like a closer look now that tax credits are gone. You know, some were eligible, some weren't eligible. But when you look at the list here, the base model Ioniq 5 is now $35,000. They dropped that by $7,600. So actually even more than makes up for the tax credit.
Wow.
But then you look at the one above that, Ioniq 5 SE rear wheel drive. This thing was dropped by $9,100. Now costs $37,500, which to me seems pretty good. Like that might be the one to get. That gets you 318 miles of range. So basically you're getting an Ioniq 5, only a couple $1,000s more than the Equinox EV, which was kind of hailed as our like affordable EV, bargain with tons of range.
Right.
Personally, I'd probably rather get the Ioniq 5 for a couple grand more. I just think those are super cool.
Sorry to say GM, but like the Equinox EV is a great car because it's a great deal, but like pound for pound, like the Ioniq 5 like trounces that thing. And like just going up one trim level to add to what you just said, on the Ioniq 5 now, if you want dual motor all-wheel drive, like the SC all-wheel drive model, which is pretty nicely equipped, kind of mid-pack, I think it's probably the one I would guess most people end up getting. Used to be 50 grand, is now $41,000. So that's like decently equipped RAV4 money for an Ioniq 5, which is a really good car. So like, yeah, these are some serious price cuts, and it's almost like you said, it's almost a better deal than it was a few days ago.
Definitely, yeah.
But it's not all sunshine and lollipops around here, folks. There's bad news too. Tesla has already changed its lease pricing on its new EVs, and they're going up. Unfortunately, the monthly lease of a Tesla Model Y has gone. It's now about $529 to $599, which is up from $479 to $529. So like a 50, 60 something ish, in $70-ish increase per month in lease payments on a Model Y. Prices of its vehicles remain unchanged, but Model 3 lease prices have gone up quite a bit. They used to be $349 to $699. Now it's $429 to $759. I'm assuming the higher end is like the Model 3 Performance, which is more expensive. But like, yeah, Tesla lease prices have gone up, and we know that company has been one to slash its prices a lot in the past. So like, I do expect they will pull some levers there in the coming months. So just, I don't know, keep an eye on it if you want to buy a Tesla,
Yeah, I would definitely expect that. I mean, remember a couple of years back, a Model Y Model Y all-wheel drive cost you like 67 grand or something.
Yeah.
Because they set their own prices, they just raise them, lower them as they wish. And so I would definitely expect those to come down in the next few months. I mean, what do you think is going to happen, in terms of pricing, lease prices? What are you looking at over the next few months now that the tax credit's gone away?
I think it's exactly that. I think it's going to be kind of erratic for a while from every automaker. I think that you will see a lot of them follow suit and cut prices because, just because the tax credits are over, like production plans, importing cars to America, like bringing a car here, selling a car in this country, that is a years long process. Like you've planned for a long time. So I think we will see some discounted prices on these things, and more automakers continuing to maybe take a profit hit as they try to move along what they can rather than go cold turkey. I don't think it will get as egregious as like what we saw in China, which is where all these different OEMs just got into this insane price war with each other and no one was making money. Like our our car companies actually have to be profitable in because of how things work here. But like, yeah, I think we are going to see some price changes in pretty rapid fire succession next few months. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, the one thing that I heard from a bunch of analysts that I was talking to this week is like everybody thinks the EV tax credit is for consumers, but it's actually for car companies. Like it allowed these car companies to sell cars for $7,500 more than they could have, essentially. It allows them to raise the price, allows them to make a little more money or lose a little less money. Um, and now with it gone, like it's going to reset where pricing should be. Um, and so, yeah, I totally agree. I think these companies still have a lot of incentive to keep sales moving forward. Like sales will certainly drop, market share will certainly drop in the near term, but like they want to be competitive with each other. One hopes want to be competitive with China. They have made these $1 billion investments in new platforms, and so they want to keep those volumes up. And depending on what demand looks like, if that means dropping your price by $5,000 or $7,000, we might see more of that. We might also definitely see more models canceled that just that can't hang, So I think it's going to be a really interesting and very choppy period over the next little while.
Yeah, I think that the cancellation thing is real. We haven't seen a ton yet, besides like the Volkswagen ID.7. Like, I'm keeping a close eye on like the Korean made like Kia EV3 and EV4, which I find really interesting. But like sans tax credit, and they're facing like a potentially a 25% tariff rate for on like Korean imported cars. Like, I don't know if that math can math anymore. So
Yeah.
we'll see. But moving on to our next story. Like there's still good news in the field, right, these days.
Yeah, with or without tax credits, the EV industry continues to advance at a rapid pace. The technology is getting better every day. And one car that kind of epitomizes that is the Porsche Cayenne Electric. We have not driven it yet. It has not launched yet. But we keep learning stuff about it that at least is getting me excited. This is an EV that will have wireless inductive charging that you can install in your garage. Super cool. I think it's the first EV ever to have that. It has 400
Yeah.
kilowatt charging up there with, the Lucid Gravity and the Tesla Cybertruck, some of the very best. And now we've learned a little bit more about its battery, and there are some big improvements there too over Porsche's previous efforts like the Taycan and the Macan.
Yeah, I really admit I didn't think too much of the Cayenne Electric at first. I was like, okay, it's a bigger Macan Electric, right? Good for you.
Yeah.
Like you got to meet emissions requirements. God bless. But it's more and more. It's like this is like their high tech flagship car. That's in some ways doing even more than the Taycan was. Like it's starting to sound like it's like a for all the Porsche nerds out there, like a 928, but electric, just like the really cutting edge stuff. So anyway, Motor One's deputy editor and friend of InsideEVs, Chris Perkins, traveled to Germany. He attended a technical briefing on the Cayenne Electric, and one of the things that we learned is Porsche has a radically new approach to just the battery pack. It's getting rid of the larger battery box and bolting modules directly into the vehicle's chassis instead, which it's never done before.
Yeah, so normally you'd have cells packed into modules that then go into the pack, and then the pack goes into the car. And instead, Porsche is kind of skipping a step here. It says that results in better energy density because it basically means that the battery pack takes up less space. And so here's what Chris's story said. There was also another advancement here. He said it's also simpler to make, as this design requires fewer fasteners. It should offer easier repairability because the modules can be dropped out from the car from underneath after you remove a fiberglass panel. Each module can be individually replaced. So a bunch of interesting advancements here from Porsche.
Yeah, it's amazing, and it's like I don't think anyone would dispute what a great car the Taycan was, and the Macan Electric that I drove a few months ago is also pretty excellent. But like this is really next level stuff, and this is why I love covering this field. Right, it shows how crazy fast this moves versus gas cars. Whereas like a big win was like 5 horsepower more from the slightly revised engine, and this is just like now you have like Porsche says, okay, we've completely rethought how we package batteries into an EV. Like that's insane.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And I think the other reason I bring this up is because we're seeing a trend here, and this is something that I've been kind of low-key obsessed with lately, is that getting more performance out of EVs is not just about chemistry. It's not just about making battery cells that are better. It's not just about solid state eventually. What's super interesting is automakers are also focusing on, okay, how do we take the cells we have and how do we package them in a smarter way that boosts energy density and boosts range? Because basically, like, if you can put the cells into the car with as little extra hardware as possible, the battery housings, the modules, other components, you can basically have more active battery material in your car in a smaller amount of space. It's lighter, you get more range. And I just think that's a super cool advancement that we're seeing in the industry right now.
Yeah, everybody's figuring this stuff out. And it kind of goes back to our pal Jim Farley for me real quick, because earlier today, as we record this, he told CNBC that this new EV that they're working on, the $30,000 affordable Ford electric truck and platform, it should cost them as much to build as a BYD would be if it was made in Mexico, they think. So that's crazy. Like that fixes the problem that these car companies are having, which is the way these things were built, and battery costs meant they could never be profitable. They were always being sold at a loss. It's like they're finding ways to beat that. And I want to salute that kind of progress a little bit,
Yeah, super cool. And part of what unlocks that cheaper manufacturing for Ford, I bet, is, in this upcoming universal EV platform, they're using LFP prismatic cells directly cell to body. So cells go directly into the chassis, something kind of similar to what Porsche is doing here. Volkswagen also recently unveiled a prismatic cell that stacks directly into the pack without a module. Rivian, it has a structural pack in the R2. So this is kind of something that we're seeing across the board, and really interesting stuff.
Yeah, and like, to go back to our Cayenne real fast, like, the battery's not all that's like slick about this thing. Tim, did you see the curved screen display that's on this thing?
Yeah, I thought it was super cool. I mean, I would like to try it out. It's hard to tell just from the photos. But for the people that haven't seen this yet, it is not curved in the way that you'd expect, right? There are other curved screens in cars that are curved kind of horizontally, kind of wrap around, the cockpit. This is curved vertically. So basically, it's like if you imagine a MacBook laptop that's open, but the whole thing is screen. That's kind of what the screen looks like. So I guess the bottom part's a little easier for you to reach from the driver's seat. It's interesting. I think as much as I am not a huge fan of just like more screen in every car, I also do think that it's cool when you see a bunch of these companies trying new things, right? The new BMW has this like parallelogram shaped screen. The Cayenne has this open book looking thing. We'll see. We'll see if any of these are any good. What did you think of it?
Yeah, my jaw kind of hit the floor a little bit when I saw the images of it. I also have not tried it yet, but I was like, oh man, that is sick. Like, this is like stuff that cell phones or smartphones are barely doing. And they kept the physical buttons around it too, which is great. So it did seem like they gave it some like real use case considerations, but really interesting technology. And like, I don't get excited about screens too much, but I'm excited to try that one out.
Yeah, I will say it is not a gentle curve. It's like a full angle in this screen, which looks pretty sick.
Yeah, good stuff.
And now, here to talk about our very favorite subject, the end of the EV tax credits, is Elaine Buckberg. So the question we've been getting a lot and wondering ourselves is, what exactly happens to America's EV landscape once the EV tax credits end in October? Will sales fall off a cliff? Will they keep growing? Will automakers keep canceling EVs and investing in V8 engines? Here to discuss is Elaine Buckberg, a senior fellow at Harvard's Salata Institute for Climate and Sustainability. Previously, she was a senior official at the U.S. Treasury Department and the chief economist at General Motors from 2018 to 2023. Elaine, thanks so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
So I wanted to start just with a little bit of your background. What's the job? Tell me, what's the job of being a chief economist at a car company like GM? Was it a lot of, seeing these kind of big policies that are getting implemented and thinking about How does that affect the business? What's kind of the role of an economist at a car company?
So first of all, it's super broad. I led our economics team. We did macroeconomic and microeconomic analyses. I led our long-term forecasting team that worried about how many pickup trucks will be sold in 2027 and how many are going to be Silverados versus F-150s.
Mm.
And I was involved in large strategy projects. And so I actually led our preparation for the new EV tax credit from the first iterations back in, I guess, 2021, all the way through the passage when it became when it became an execution issue.
I'm going to say a bit of ignorance here. Is that a recent role at GM? Have they always had like a top economist in that role? Is that a recent thing for automakers in general? I didn't really know they did that, but it makes sense they do.
GM has had a chief economist going back many decades. And you can imagine that the job of the GM chief economist at some point in the past involved a lot of worrying about antitrust. But think about it. It's a company that makes long-term investments all over the world and needs to think about those returned to investments. And so the role has been there for many, many decades.
Super interesting. And you got to see like the breadth of the modern EV tax credit from when it was created to unfortunately this week as we record and when we bid it farewell for now or whatever. You've recently wrote that losing the EV tax credit was the most consequential single policy impacting EV adoption moving forward. Would you tell us more about that? I was actually surprised that that was a thought you had.
Did I write that?
Maybe not your word wasn't exactly consequential, but in one of your reports where you were looking at a bunch of these policy impacts and what they could do, it was the one that had the biggest impact on the future of EV sales going forward, on EV market share going forward.
In terms of taking things away, it is a really big impact. And so thinking long term, right? You can think of short term, you can think long term. If you think long term about what happens in 2030.
Right.
If you take away the EV tax credits alone, that would take 6 percentage points off the EV share of sales in 2030. So if you go from a pre-Trump and 2024 baseline of 48% in 2030, that would take you down to 42%. One Big Beautiful Bill Act, of course, also eliminates the charger credits. That's when we add that in, it brings you down to minus 8.5 percentage points. So the combination of the two, when you also take away the charger credits for home and business installation, that takes off another 2.5 percentage points. So you're talking about being 39.5 in 2030 just from those two policy impacts.
See, the way we write about this often is like, this isn't the end of electrification in America, certainly, but it is a speed bump. But it sounds like you've put real context into what a speed bump is. And it sounds like that's a pretty costly speed bump for a company like General Motors, for example, or other large automakers, right?
Well, the first point I'd make, though, is how much growth you're still projecting. So this still says, EV share of sales in 2024 was about 8%. So this says, well, you're still going to be at a big multiple of that. It's still growing over the next 5 years, just not as quickly as it would have. And I think that's really important. In the near term, sure, you'll see big drop in sales in the fourth quarter because people will have timed their purchases to pull ahead to access the EV tax credit in the third quarter. And you may well see a weak first quarter, and the first quarter tends to be weaker in terms of EV share. But by about the second quarter, you're probably going to be back on track. And most forecasters that were doing higher frequency forecasts say EV share of sales in 2026 will be at least what it was in 2025 because you still have the entries coming.
Yeah.
They continue to become better substitutes for buying an internal combustion engine car. More choice, longer ranges, faster charging.
Which is that's something that we've seen a lot in our own testing and when we reported the podcast, Tim and I. It's the speed at which these cars are improving. It feels like it's like what a gas car used to do in 10 years. How happens in one? But to that point, I want to ask, like, what do you think, if not this policy, what drives EV adoption and growth and advancements moving forward? Is it in your mind primarily charging? Is it cost coming down? Is it new models? Is it better range? All the above?
So our research certainly says like dollar for dollar investing in charging is far better value than investing in EV tax credits.
Oh, fascinating.
And that work goes back to a refereed journal publication by some of my colleagues in 2023. And you see that here too, in our research. The charger credits will save about $15 billion. The EV tax credits will save about $68 billion. The charger credits have almost half the impact of the EV tax credits. But, let's think a few years ahead. So first of all, next year there'll be at least 5 EVs in the market that offer at least 400 miles of range. So
Yeah.
we've had the Hummer for a long time. We've got the Sierra, we have the Escalade, we have a BMW coming and a Mercedes coming that are SUVs that meet that mark. So imagine we get to, say, 2028. And there are a bunch of models in the market that are 400 miles of range. I don't know how many there will be in 2020. Don't get me wrong. There'll be over 400 miles of range. They'll probably be charging faster, right? Charging speeds keep going up by faster chargers being available and technological development on the vehicle end. So you're going to charge from 20 to 80 and, if you get on a 350 plus on 15 minutes,
Yeah.
maybe better. The cost differential would keep narrowing from reduction in battery cost. And so you get to within a number that people can think about, especially if they can home charge and their savings on electricity versus gasoline. And it's quieter, it's smoother, it's got better acceleration, right? Then it
Yeah.
becomes like a much more perfect substitute for your internal combustion engine vehicle. GM market research going back years basically said people are perfectly open to an EV as long as they don't have to give up anything they like about their ICE car.
Yeah.
But you start to get that point, and for those people who can charge at home, they never need to go to the gas station. It actually is easier.
Yeah. I hit a milestone in my gas-powered car. I have an EV and a gas-powered car. The second one, my fuel light came on. I realized I had just forgotten to fill it up in forever. And I was like, I've been a car guy my whole life, and that's never happened to me before. But that's the kind of stuff that happens here. It's wild,
Right. But think about that scenario. Then almost everyone knows someone who owns an EV, because a few years out, there's also going to be a lot more used EVs penetrating the used market in communities where more people arrive used cars. So almost everyone's going to know one, and they're going to say, I'm never going back.
Yeah.
And yeah, it actually works. And yeah, when I go on a road trip, maybe it takes a little more planning, but basically if we're putting ourselves out 3 years, the software is better. I'm assuming there's more data availability, reliability keeps getting better. I think that's a market outcome. And when people do a road trip, it's not so hard.
So basically, these subsidies going away, it is a problem, but we've the industry has hit this, has gained enough momentum that the technology is improving. People like them. People are seeing their neighbor now has one. And so that's what tells you this momentum, this growth will ultimately continue over time. Just maybe not as quickly as it could have.
Not as quickly. And I mean, that matters. That matters from an economic policy perspective. That matters from an international competitiveness perspective. If we're not scaling as fast as other countries are, then we're not getting efficient at making EVs as much as other countries are. And that calls into question our ability to compete. And efficiency is important because it's the cost per job or per vehicle. It's how much waste you have, how much warranty costs you have. And just your ability to bring down that production cost. And so that really matters in terms of long-term competitiveness, especially if the tariffs going on, put in place right now may not be here forever. Or at least not at the same rates.
And your ability to, like we said, one of the big drivers of EV adoption eventually is going to be these costs coming down, or has been, costs coming down and eventually reaching to that cost parity with gas, and then maybe even below that. That's when people start to see, okay, if I'm going to pay, $40,000 for this or that, maybe I'll really consider the EV. But it seems like this, you're delaying the onset of these big economies of scale where car companies can actually sell these things for a profit at a low price.
Fast. Yeah. And that's why you see automakers pulling back somewhat their plans.
Mhm.
But then I really believe that every major automaker, with the exception of Toyota, really believes that EVs are the future and that they need to win in that market to survive long term. And so they are motivated, but they may play at the margins, right? First of all their investment cases are, being scrutinized more with the additional costs of tariffs hitting them. Their funds to invest are lower. And the traditional automakers may say, "Oh, can I sell a few more?" Especially if you take away fuel economy, because there's zero fines, and you might take away greenhouse gas, and there won't be stricter regulations possibly in other states because California's lost its waiver, although that's being challenged in court. I could sell a few more high profit ICE vehicles and help fund those investments and improve my profitability, which affects my cost of capital and my ability to keep funding them. So at the margin, they'll be somewhat less, but I think long term, they know they need to win in EVs, and that market share can also be very persistent. So getting market share now is important to that long run.
Mm-hmm. And why do you say, like, why do you think they need to win in EVs? Is it mostly a China conversation? Is it like China's expanding all over the world? They may end up here someday, and so if you lag behind, you're going to pay the price later. Or is it other
I
stuff
think
as
they
well?
just think it's the future of the industry. I think that they expect that EVs will take over, and policy measures can affect the timing of that. But I still think they understand that it's a better experience for the consumer, but they still have a work to do to bring down battery costs, to achieve cost parity, and to get charging out there and solve the highway charging issue, right? So the highway charging issue is just a big psychological barrier for every household. They want their cars to be full purpose, even if they don't actually do any road trips, and also have other cars in the household.
You just described the American buyer to a nutshell. Yeah.
And you have to think about people who live in cities, especially who are less likely to be able to home charge. They're more likely to rent. They're more likely to live in multifamily housing. They're more likely to park on the street versus have dedicated parking.
So I guess one of the silver linings, and you mentioned how important the charging policy is as well as direct subsidies for the cars. One silver lining might be that NEVI, it had this moment of like the funds were stopped for a while, and now seems like it's kind of getting back on track, right? Like that's not, we've maybe, the industry has maybe avoided the absolute worst case scenario of like every EV policy getting completely obliterated.
Right. And just going down here, I mean, the NEVI funds are actually super powerful. So if you were to take away the NEVI chargers, $7.5 billion, or actually NEVI's $5 billion, right? The whole thing's 7.5 in bipartisan infrastructure, but just $5 billion, we think would take over 4 percentage points off the 2030 EV sales share if it were done in addition to the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. So the NEVI dollars are just very critical.
That's remarkable. That shows just how important infrastructure is, like just period, full stop, right? That's such a wild difference in those two figures.
Right. And our model is designed to have a circular feedback effect between the number of EV roads on the road and the number of chargers. People want to know that the chargers are there, public charging is there before they'll buy an EV. But the charging providers are also looking at what's the uptake of EVs and what happens to the park of EVs or the fleet of EVs in the country as they plan the pace of their investment.
Yeah.
Yeah. So going back to the tax credit, like you mentioned that you were involved in kind of planning around the tax credit for GM. Do you think it's been around in various forms for over a decade? Do you think that this EV tax credit has basically done its job, that it's kind of, pushed the industry to invest in this technology more than they would have? And even though it's going away, its legacy will be felt kind of for years to come.
So I think it certainly helped, right? So the initial theory of the ARA 2008 tax credit was sort of infant industry, that we're going to give everyone up to 200,000, and at that point you should be efficient. And you sort of will take it away from you, but we'll encourage other automakers to also get their share of the tax credit. The IRA tax credit is much more pro-climate and maybe pro-industrial policy. So we want to pull forward sales and induce sales, and we also want to get the industry going. So we're not going to phase it out. It's going to be out there for 10 years, by which time we really hope whether we're at cost parity. But that would accelerate EV adoption, reduce cumulative emissions, and also give industry more confidence that policy would be stable, which obviously wasn't the case, but to help inform their investment decisions, including the location of them.
Yeah, and do you feel like in retrospect that some of those approaches might have been flawed? I mean, there was such an emphasis on cutting off Chinese minerals, Chinese critical components and batteries, that, by the end, I think only a fewer than 20 EVs qualified for the tax credit at purchase, which is why so many got leased. And it's like, were some of the restrictions on this, kind of anti-growth in this field, or do you think that was justified?
So, first of all, the restrictions on Chinese sourcing, which were a Manchin aspect, I think there's a lot to be said for that. Right. It says, and we're not going to spend to build a US EV industry that China has a chokehold over.
Sure. Yeah. 100%.
And we're also going to make this more cost efficient. So IRA had two different ways where they were trying to make the tax credit more cost efficient. One aspect was I'm setting these high thresholds. It has to be, you need North American manufacturing. You need to meet these sourcing requirements. Otherwise, we don't spend on it. So that makes it less expensive from a government spending proposition. I think I would actually say that a big question, if you're trying to, was that it's the lease loophole. And that the commercial tax credit, which might have been designed to get your cable provider and your landscaping company to adopt EVs, actually became this gateway for leases.
Yeah.
And that policy combination never made any sense to me. And I don't think that was really, an alternative approach to make this cheaper would have been just to close the lease loophole and have parallel requirements.
It undermined the regular, the 30D, the purchase.
Put the
incentive.
Income caps, put the price caps, which are important to the cost of the credit and also sort of important to an equity perspective. Why should we subsidize someone who's going to make the purchase anyway? We're trying to catalyze marginal purchases. And so if you would ask me what to do to make the policy cheaper, I would have closed the lease loophole and not eliminated the credit.
Interesting. I mean, we'd written about this many times at InsideEVs. It's like there were, and like I took advantage of one of these crazy deals last year too, but we were talking about, lease deals for $200 a month, $250 a month, that we said to our audience, like, this stuff is not going to last forever. This is not, the math doesn't math. It's not financially sustainable. And like, there were car companies that were eating a lot of money, with these competitive lease deals. They almost sound like it was, by the end, a bit of a race to the bottom for them too.
Yeah, I mean, the leasing is also more problematic for the companies. So first of all, in terms of how many vehicles qualified for the purchase tax credit, I think that would have improved over time, that over time companies would have worked out their sourcing more. And some were doing it faster than others. So the other thing about leases is that for, a company would much rather sell you a car than lease you a car because they have to use up their balance sheet. And they're also, you don't want every single vehicle to be returned to you in 3 years because that creates a big stock of, not quite new vehicles that are competing in the market against your brand new vehicles.
Yeah.
So automakers really want to limit the number of lease deals they're doing. It would never be a full substitute if you'd rather drive people to outright purchase.
So help us get inside the brain of an auto company right now. Like, we've seen a lot of these companies postponing models, canceling models, pulling back their sales, projections. because of the tax credits, because of other policies going away, because of demand growth kind of slowing down. But at the same time, like we're saying, like they believe this is the future. They believe they need to go this direction to compete. They may even have investments that they've made that they want to see through. What's going through? What are the conversations happening? What are the priorities that these car companies have to weigh when they're thinking like, okay, we're going to cancel this EV, right? It's not as simple as just the tax credits going away, so we're going to step back, right?
So first of all, I think like as a baseline, you have to assume that all these auto companies are looking at investing vastly more in terms of annual capital investment to move to EV programs and to invest in autonomy, both the continuum of driver assisted systems and pure autonomy, than they were historically. So they're looking at trying to achieve this much higher level of capital investment. And then they're trying to optimize between long-term goals and the near term. And in the near term, what happens to their profits affects their share price and their cost of capital. That cost of capital is important to enabling those investments. So they're sitting there optimizing. And it's important to also understand that one new EV program is more expensive than one new internal combustion engine program because it's a bigger change in your plant. And so they're trying to do that optimization. And they're trying to say, well, I want to win, but I want to win relative to my competitors. And I need to show profits.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of adjustment. And I think it probably also makes more headlines than if GM said, oh, my Chevy Equinox ICE, I think I'm going to bring out the next generation 6 months later.
Yeah. You called it earlier like policy consistency, I believe. And I call this policy whiplash. It's become something I've kind of been like low key obsessed with lately. I just want to get your thoughts on this. Is that we have such a drastic policy shift in America right now, going from the focus on EVs under the Biden administration, trying to push for a mostly electric future in America. Now we have no more tax credits. We have no more fuel economy rules. We're going after tailpipe emissions. It is so night and day. So if you're a company, like, how are you supposed to deal with this? And is this the future of America? It's just this insane kind of like back and forth every 4 maybe years now.
So one, I think if you're an automaker, this is just an enormous amount to digest.
Yeah.
An enormous amount of change, an enormous amount of adjustments. Again, many of the automakers have announced $1 billion or more in tariff hits that they need to, and they're looking at what does my profit look like and what's going to happen to my stock price and that cost of capital. So they're optimizing across all these things. And I think it is really policy whiplash. While our parties have steadily become more divided over time, I think this is just an extraordinary amount of policy. And it's also an extraordinary amount of uncertain policy. Lots of things are happening by executive order. This administration is doing things that haven't been done before and are being challenged. So read all the IEPA tariffs being challenged in court. So no one knows if they're going to be there next week or whether the Supreme Court will decide that is the White House didn't have the authority to put them in place. So, I think companies have gotten used to, been training on uncertainty. They were training in the trade war 1.0. They were training in a COVID and the chip shortage, but this probably feels like at least as big as any of those.
Mm-hmm. And to talk to us more about the tariff environment, just to kind of get off a little bit from pure EV policy.
Moving from one pleasant topic to a more exciting
so
topic.
Let's start
right,
with this. The tariff on an EV imported from China, if it were imported, maybe Polestars are being imported, 135%.
Yeah.
That's a base auto rate of 25% plus 100% for a Chinese-made EV. Plus a 10% China IEPA tariff, so 135%.
Incredible. Yeah.
That's what killed the Polestar too. Yeah, a good example. It's just like that's just off the table for now, is building those things or a Chinese brand in America.
Yeah, and how much do you think that affects, obviously, like you said, it's a chaotic environment for these companies to deal with. It's also just in pure financial terms, it is tons of money that they're spending or that they are being charged to, comply with these new policies. How does that impact the future of these other big investments they're making, the future of electrification? Is it something where, because they're not making as a fat profit, they need to think hard about what exactly they're investing in and on what timelines?
Well, when you're making your profit, right, your revenue is a plus item and your investments are a minus item. So the
Hmm.
more you invest, the lower your profit. And so when you're also having this big unforeseen cost for tariffs, it's harder to invest as much.
Yeah.
Add to that 3 of the automakers had very expensive contracts reached in 2023.
Yeah. So it's like you're being pushed in the future, a future is coming, electrified and autonomous, but there are just all these roadblocks all of a sudden to putting the capital in that direction it needs to go, it sounds like.
Right. And then
Yeah.
you're also taking away, though, some of the sticks that were being used to get automakers to invest in EVs. So
Right.
before, if you didn't meet your CAFE requirements, this fuel economy fleet average or fleet averages, because there's multiple fleets, you would face fines. Now there are no fines. The fines are 0.
Mm-hmm.
And if you didn't meet your tailpipe emissions fleet requirements, you could have fines and you'd have to go buy credits. But now you don't need to spend money on credits. Well, you may not, right? The administration intends to eliminate the endangerment finding, which is the health basis of regulating tailpipe emissions, which would then eliminate the tailpipe emissions rule. Not done.
Mm-hmm.
And then you had California having the right to set even harder emission standards, and other states allowed to follow it. And now the administration has said, no, that's no longer an option. So if you take away the endangerment finding, we could have 0 environmental regulation of vehicles for the first time since the 1970s. And virtually every other country has that.
It's wild.
I just want to qualify for 1 second that California is fighting in court whether or not the legislative measure used to eliminate that waiver, the Congressional Review Act, is actually a legitimate way to do so, and also looking how it could use other policies to achieve the same thing. So the jury's still out a bit on that one.
And the administration's argument is look, all that crap was just making your car more expensive. We're going to get rid of all that stuff. And who cares if it's a gas car you're buying, because climate change is fake anyway, but your car's going to get cheaper thanks to us. And that's their argument. I mean, do you feel like what's your take on that particular argument, Elaine?
So first of all, I think when you add tariffs on, your car's not getting cheaper.
Yeah.
Right. And that's harder to see in the data because you have to follow ATPs, I think, rather than average transaction prices, not manufacturer suggested retail prices, because the automaker incentives are a big thing that can flex. But we'll see that. And then at what point, are the tariffs, especially the reciprocal tariffs, perceived as permanent? And so there'd be more pass through to prices.
Yeah.
Now EVs, by taking away the tax credit, you make the effective price to the consumer net of the credit higher right away. As we discussed, you slow that process of scaling and learning. So you slow the process. And so it makes that price gap between internal combustion engine and EV prices larger and more persistent than it would have been otherwise, which is favorable to sales of ICE vehicles and favorable to the oil industry.
Yeah. Coming to the end now, and I'm so grateful for your time and insights here, Elaine. This has been so excellent. A big part of your focus at General Motors was also U.S.-China competition and policy issues there. Do you think it's possible we will see cars from a Chinese OEM in the United States in the next 5 years, 10 years, ever? Like, what's your take on what that
Oh,
entry could
yeah,
look
it's
like?
definitely possible. And so it depends, first of all, what the policy barriers are. It depends what that price gap is, or the cost gap, and whether or not those tariffs are instated. But the tariffs might not still be there.
Mhm.
China is scaling way faster. Um, and if you lower those tariff barriers, Chinese vehicles might still be competitive, which is why it really worries me that we're not scaling our own EV production as fast. Now, right, leapfrogging is possible. No one, a few years ago, how many people would have predicted BYD would be outselling Tesla?
Certainly not
So
me.
it's not that it can't be leapfrogged again. Would we, for example, be the first ones to achieve commercializable solid state? Like, there are changes that are possible, but Chinese EVs are definitely a giant competitive threat. And to be fair, if like Chinese EVs came into this country with a low or negligible no tariff barrier, then we'd sell more EVs faster and we'd reduce emissions faster. And
Yeah.
that could be good from a climate perspective.
Or if and I kind of always this would be the case, right? It's some president at some point we made a trade deal with China, and as part of this, BYD gets a factory in Ohio, and they're going to be made here. I mean, is that within the realm possibility, or would the U.S. just not allow that on
Oh, I
the
think that's
auspices?
perfectly plausible. I think this administration might be comfortable with that. And I think that's one of the
Yeah.
interesting aspects of removing the EV purchase tax credit. Because if you tried to make a BYD in China or in Mexico, you would have almost certainly had critical minerals and or battery components coming from China. And so they wouldn't be eligible for the tax
Mm,
credit. And that would have been a wedge between
Right.
the price to the consumer of a Chinese company's EV versus an EV that met the requirements. And so you've actually removed that wedge.
Yeah.
right. So it's one of those things that often gets missed in the tax credit conversation. Is like it's not just a handout to sell these cars or a handout to rich people to buy more EVs. It actually had these very strict, anti-China provisions that it was
Yeah.
prioritizing a very specific subset of cars, right?
Right. And it was trying to encourage a supply chain that did not run through China, or at
Yeah.
least a substantial proportion of the supply chain not running through China.
All right. I think that's all the time we have, Elaine. We really appreciate it. Thanks so much for being on the show today.
Great talking with you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Elaine. It's been wonderful. That was a great discussion. Now it's time for Plus Minus, our segment where we talk about who's up and who's down in the EV world. Tim, who you got for me this week?
My plus is EV sales, maybe for the last time in a long time. Like we said, EV sales in Q3 did really, really well. So in the US, an estimated 410,000 EVs were sold in Q3. That hit 10% market share. And that was a record, like not even close. It blew away every other previous quarter. And that's good news. I think we should latch on to a little bit of the good news while we have it.
To which I say no. I have a minus this week, and it's America. I think that, this policy whiplash that we're seeing, like losing tax credits, sticking tariffs to these car companies, I don't think it's going to save us any money. I don't think it's going to help us compete with China. It's certainly not going to clean our air. It's not good for the consumer. It's not good for the advancement of the industry. It's just like we can sugarcoat it all day and talk about like the deals that may or may not be happening, but like this is an L for like this country and industrial policy and technological competitiveness, and it sucks to see. And I think it's something we're gonna pay for in the long term. So buckle up, I guess.
Very true.
Yeah.
You're like that cool history teacher in high school that teaches all the kids to hate America.
Actually,
but
no.
But he's right.
Yeah. Yeah, the Crimean War wasn't awesome, kids. All right. Well, thanks for listening to the Plugged In podcast from InsideEVs. We'll be back next Friday. Today's show is produced by Michael Perkins and brought to you by the Motorsport Network.
Make sure to follow us wherever you get your podcasts, subscribe to the InsideEVs YouTube channel, and check out all our latest coverage on InsideEVs.com. See you next time.
See you next time.